A reminder that this conference is unlike your traditional webinar presentation kinds of conference. What we're doing here today is engaging in strategic conversations. We're going to begin with a conversation between two thought leaders who will wrestle with an important topic for 20 to 30 minutes to get our conversation started. And then the floor is open to you. And we really hope that you will join the discussion. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your frame, bottom of your screen to submit a question. We have had some questions submitted in advance. But we hope that those of you in the audience will feel motivated to add your thoughts, get into the conversation. If you do decide to submit a question, all you have to do is submit the question. Once we recognize you, then click on the raise your hand tab so our producers can identify you in the crowd. We have a fairly large crowd joining us today, and they'll give you permission to turn on your camera and your mic, and then you're up on stage with our speakers. So our next topic is obviously a timely one and an important one. How can technology help an employer advance its DE&I efforts? We have two great discussants joining us today to kick off our strategic conversation. Thad Price is the CEO of Talroo, and Julie Sowash is the Executive Director of Disability Solutions. Just a reminder, we do very short introductions here at TA Tech, so we've asked both of them to tell you a little bit more about themselves when they come up on the screen. Thad and Julie, stage is all yours.
Hi, how is everyone? I am not. Hi, there you are. Hey, Thad,
Hi.
How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. Excited to be here. Thanks to the DE team and the TA Tech team for having us, and a great discussion.
Likewise. Julie, would you like to start with a brief introduction, and then I'll follow you?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Julie Sowash. Many of you know me as Mrs. Sowash, which is okay too, at least sometimes. I am the Executive Director of Disability Solutions. We are a global non-for-profit that focuses directly on working with companies like DE members, like those that you all serve in your TA Tech positions, to create actual hiring outcomes for talent with disabilities, including veterans with disabilities. And so we've helped companies like Pepsi, Synchrony, American Express, Frito-Lay hire thousands of people with disabilities in sustainable and replicatable ways. You can kind of think of us as an RPO for a niche community. I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Crazy in the Kink, which is all about diversity and inclusion with my good friend Torrin Ellis. And as many of you know, if you've heard me speak before, I'm also a person with a disability. I live with multiple mental illnesses since my late 20s or my early 20s, late teens, and I'll live with those for the rest of my life. Thanks, Thad.
Perfect. Well, good morning. Hi, I'm Thad Price, CEO here at Talroo, coming from our virtual office in Austin. Pleasure to have a chance to share some ideas around technology and diversity inclusion with you. A little bit about Talroo. We're a talent attraction platform. We help companies attract talent and find the right audiences for open positions. Been building technology for probably about 15 to 20 years to help companies attract talent. So looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you all this morning, and looking forward to a great discussion. Again, thank you all for the invite, and it should be a great one. Thanks very much. Julie, I think it may be good to share a little bit more about the impact to kick us off of diversity inclusion from a company perspective. And I have a few quotes from a couple of research experts in this field that I thought would be great to kick it off. To kind of really dive into this discussion before we start talking about technology. And we, before this call, we were talking a little bit more about the job seeker journey. And I think that may be a great way to start, to showcase, since we have a lot of access to job seekers, you have a lot of access and a lot of experience and process. And so I think we can talk a little bit more about how technology can help, the job seeker journey. Technology can actually help the process and what we're seeing from some technology vendors. But, one of the things that I think we all have to think about as we make decisions, diversity inclusion decisions for our companies is we have to understand what the impact is. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of social aspect, which is very important, with making these decisions. But also, there's a business sense impact as well. Gartner reports that in a diverse workforce, performance improves by 12%, and the intent to stay by 20%. So great stats, and really thinking about the business sense of diversity. And the McKinsey & Company reports that businesses in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are more likely to be more financially successful. Again, executive teams with gender diversity are 21% more likely to outperform their peers. So I think that these are really timely. These are really timely statistics that help us really drive this discussion. At the top, Julie, anything to add to that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we know that the companies that we work with, people stay longer. They have on average 14% higher retention than your average person in the same position. So we know that there's a great business case for diversity. And sometimes I get frustrated because we're still having this conversation, but I know that as we continue to grow, we have to continue to remind everyone that this is a human activity and it's also a business activity. And as talent acquisition leaders and TA vendors, we have a real opportunity to make change within our organizations in ways that a lot of leaders don't.
Yep. I think an opportunity and an obligation, right? I think that's
Yes.
really how we should think about this. So let's talk a little bit about the job seeker journey. And we have a lot of access at Talroo. We power about 1.8 billion job searches a month, and so we see this experience of the job seeker journey. And I think we should think of it as a journey, right? We should think of it as a journey of, do I want to come work for you? And I think that this has shifted in the last few years. It really is this, the idea of branding and marketing is, please convince me to submit my application to the employer. And in a lot of cases, this is on everyone's, this is something that everyone is concerned about and everyone wants to be a part of. And so I think we have to think about that. We have to think about all different changes in society that's really shaping this, and we have to build an awareness. We have to build an awareness from the entire experience. And so I think we have to really think about this idea of brand and the touch points that happen within the job seeker journey. And we as executives have to ensure that from an external perspective, that we're reaching the right audience necessary to really ensure that internally we're doing right and we're bridging that gap. And I think that, that's one of the things I think is super important. Julie, from your perspective, what type of process improvements have you seen with some of the companies that you worked with that have embraced this? And then I'll share a little bit more about some of the technologies in the industry that we're seeing that help bridge this gap.
Yeah, so one of the most important things is having a really good set of technology partners that are willing to work with you to get to your goals. And we've been really lucky with the companies that we work with to have those great partners like Pontoon, like ADP, so that we can, within the system of record, right, I'll put my compliance hat on, how do we create opportunity within that process? And so really how we look at it, I'm not a tech person, right? I'm a process person. And so all the way from how are we advertising those jobs? How are we reaching and educating job seekers, community-based organizations, creating that brand that's driving that talent in to apply, but then what are the systems and processes that they're meeting on the other end? And I think a lot of times as TA people, we think about this process goes to this vendor, this process goes to this vendor, and this process goes to this vendor. And we don't necessarily think about how that full experience might impact someone with a disability. For example, if your corporate career site is not accessible, if you're advertising to niche sites that aren't accessible, and then the process that's used really, again, kind of compliance focused is risk mitigation. And we're never going to change things if our whole goal is to mitigate risk. We're going to just continue to get more and more. And what's really great with the the OFCCP and Section 503 in particular is that they have allowed us to build opportunity within those systems to create additional ways to get people through, people with disabilities through to that hire. And that was really a big unlock for us is we were finding great talent, we were moving great talent through, but we weren't getting them through the system. So then I had to start to really dive deep with our customers and say, what are the parameters here that's knocking all this qualified talent out that's never seeing the light of day? And then at the end of that, right, are people staying longer after they get hired? Are they satisfied in their job after they get hired? And continuing to constantly refresh that process, because I think the other thing that I've learned, again, as a non-tech person, is there's a big habit to set it and forget it. And we can't do that. Whatever it is that we're using, whether it's conversational AI, texting, ATS, whatever assessment, it constantly has to be revised to make sure that it's not a garbage in, garbage out system. And really, that's where I spend the majority of my days, looking at how to simplify the apply process, how to remove barriers to employment that we know are there for not just people with disabilities, but all marginalized populations when we get to the apply. And then we can start doing really cool things like moving them up and getting them into management positions.
Makes sense. And you bring up a great point about this idea of garbage in, garbage out. We talk a lot about this when we talk about machine learning and AI. And the reality is until the humans do a better job, machines won't do a better job. And this is something that you hear constantly and time again. And so it comes to that actual level of awareness that's needed throughout the entire job seeker journey, throughout the entire hiring process, throughout the actual internal process as well. From a technology perspective, there are some vendors that are providing great support to think about how you're attracting talent and think about how you're actually crafting job descriptions. There are a couple that come to mind. There's Textio and Gender Decoder as well. There's a few others that are out there. OnGig has an option as well. And so what these systems do is it basically helps you identify where, when you're actually crafting your job descriptions, are there words there that may provide some bias, right? To serve as to turn off certain groups, right? An example would be, we've all heard job descriptions. We've all heard job descriptions around ninja or rock star or things like that. Like, we've all seen those job descriptions, or maybe we've written those job descriptions at some point in our life. And those are, there's definitely gender bias in those type of words. And so there are technologies out there that are looking to identify that and provide that and unearth the awareness. So again, I go back to this idea of awareness, right? Whether it's technology or whether it's actually in processes, we have to be aware, and we constantly have to be thinking how we can do this better. And I think that's where you see a lot of the technology investment, really understanding, because of this idea of, humans really need to do a better job, across the board. And so, our applicant tracking system that we use is Greenhouse. And so Greenhouse has a nudge in their actual process when you actually open a rec, where it provides that level of awareness at each stage of the process. And so, technology like that is trying to build this awareness. Of course, Glassdoor a few months ago actually released their score, right? Their diversity scoring as well on pages, on branded pages. So there's a lot of focus around how to be open and how to build this awareness externally and internally about what needs to happen in order to bridge the gap and turn the tide. So it's really an exciting place. And I think, Julie, you mentioned we've been talking about this for years. This is a defining moment for us. This year has been a defining moment for us. So it's exciting for this initiative.
Yeah, and just as a side note, I would be very interested to hear what everyone thinks about the Glassdoor diversity efforts. As a person with a disability, I'm super uncomfortable with it. I think it's just a raw play for data, if I'm being transparent. and I don't trust necessarily that my data is secure in the way that it's going to be used just from reading like the terms and conditions. So I think when companies do things like that, they need to be very thoughtful, right? I'm giving you something that can and has been used against me for potentially my whole life, depending on what that information is. And you have to be good custodians of that data. That's really important if you want to have trust and actually be able to get to the outcomes piece. And you know, one thing that you mentioned in terms of like the garbage in, garbage out, going back to that for a minute, is, you know, every time I talk to a vendor that's using machine learning or AI, I ask them, how are you thinking about people who have cognitive disabilities? How are you thinking about people who have mental health disabilities? How are you thinking about people with employment gaps? And the answer is always, well, race and gender, right? Like, we can anonymize race and gender, we can take out these key pieces, and that's important, right? We need to recognize how technology can help us remove bias when the data that it's bringing in is right. And again, from a non-tech perspective, an algorithm is built to please you. It's built to give you the outcome that you want so that you like it better. Really non-tech answer. And if we take that tech and we put it into place and we're not really getting down into the deep of the data that is coming out of that, right? And by data, I mean applicants and job seekers, and recognizing where adjustments need to be made constantly, and where we're never going to get to a place where we can hire people of color, people with disabilities, veterans who are not exactly sitting in that algorithm. And it just occurred to me right before we jumped on this call, it's like, you can never actually remove bias, right? Physically, for a human, you can recognize your bias and it's not unconscious anymore, right? It's now conscious bias and you can work against it. And I think technology could be used to kind of counterbalance that bias as opposed to try to remove it because it's always going to exist. And, you know, there are other things that you can do outside of, again, just straight candidate flow as you think about building your employer brand and process transparency. One thing that we talk about all of the time is who wrote your job descriptions. If it's someone like us with a master's degree and a background in TA or HR, and you're writing a job description for an entry-level person, you're writing at a freshman in college kind of level, you're losing talent that can do the job. And that bias, it may be socioeconomic, but it's also going to be biased against marginalized populations, right? And so we need to constantly be checking those things and create opportunities for process transparency. Edison International does a really nice job of laying out their full process online. So you go to their site, you see this is step 1, step 2, step 3. It has guides that go with it. It has best practices. So when you're entering that process, if you have a cognitive deficiency, if you have a mental illness, you understand exactly what's coming out, right? Exactly every piece that is part of that process. And that creates really opportunity that doesn't exist before when we are inclusive in the way that we speak to those job seekers, not as adversaries, but as customers and potential levers that help us grow our business.
Yeah, the level of transparency is blissful in so many ways when you think about that, right? But yeah, terrific ideas. You know, and it really does start at it starts at so many different levels. And so, you know, as we think about technology and we think about where we can improve, you know, I would say, you know, think of an internal process from your perspective and look at the entire journey of the job seeker and look at how there could be technology that you could insert in that entire journey, from talent attraction to, you know, even screening, other types of processes, onboarding, that you can ensure that you're moving the ball forward with. So, you know, it is an interesting, definitely an interesting time for us, needed time for us. So, you know, one of the things you could think about as we talk about, you know, I was reading an article a number of years ago, and they were talking about recruiting at Google, right? And Google traditionally recruited at many of the Ivy Leagues. And so when you recruit at many of the Ivy Leagues, you know, from a college recruiting perspective, you're getting a certain type of candidate, right? You're getting a certain type of employee. And of course, they moved on from that and looked at a different strategy. And I think you have to think at every recruiting component that you have, where you can do a better job, and think differently. You know, before, you know, we were talking, Julie, about thinking differently, thinking things you can't do the same thing you've been doing for the last 10 years or 15 years, because you're going to get the same result. And we all know what that is, right? That's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, and expecting different results. And so you really have to think of this entire journey, how technology can help you, can help you change it up. Any thoughts to that, and kind of college recruiting and where you recruit from, and how to think about that a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, very broadly, one of the things that I like about programmatic advertising is it does allow you to spread that budget out a little bit more, which means you can get to more colleges, you can get to the HBCUs, you can get to more places. Now, I think that you broadly are going to have to pay a premium to get into some of those sites, but that premium might still be lower than what you would pay kind of in a duration-based package. And absolutely what you're talking about from a college perspective, you know what a demographic from a college and a university looks like when you start recruiting from it. If you're not looking at diverse colleges, if you're not engaging with talent with disabilities, you're missing out. We know that college kids are graduating at roughly the same rate as their college kids with disabilities are graduating at roughly the same rate as their able-bodied peers, but 70% of them are leaving school without a job. And so there's this talent pool right here, educated, ready to come and be invested in, who is leaving without that job. Perhaps they don't have the right connections, the right social skills, the right network, and companies are not taking advantage of that pipeline in any way. And I think, too, we need to be smarter as corporations about, exactly right, Alex Murphy. I just saw your comment. We need to be thinking about where we actually need college educations, and where we as companies should be building talent pipelines to fill our stocks. Some of the things are our ranks. Google's doing some things now to develop coders. We shouldn't, as companies be waiting on the federal government and the US education system to build our pipeline. We should be proactively building our pipeline in unique ways that allows for diverse talent that maybe isn't at that Ivy League, didn't grow up in kind of that coding environment, to still get access to the opportunity. And for our technology needs to be able to recognize that because you were something in life doesn't mean you always want to be that same thing in life. And that we can pick out and identify the skills and the experience that come with lower level jobs and how they can be transferred into leadership jobs. And so again, kind of, thinking very broadly is getting outside of the box, pushing where you're advertising, opening up new college and vocational or whatever, building your own pipelines. All of those things should come together in a very broad strategy. And, diversity and inclusion and talent acquisition aren't always talking to each other. A lot of times diversity and inclusion is seen as an internal activity. And I think we're going to see that change, but talent acquisition is really going to have to get deep into what they're doing and what the outcomes are going to do, and how we support more diversity. And, just one more thing, and then I'll pass it back to you, is there are also things that we should be doing with technology to make applying more seamless and more simple, right? So Alex, I'll mention, JobSync. If you are advertising to a niche disability board, and then you're sending people to apply into an environment that is not accessible, that is not designed to help people succeed, having a JobSync, right? Being able to finish that apply right online or right there on that one stop, that makes sense. Like an hourly where you're applying on your mobile phone and you're answering conversational questions that put the job seeker at ease, but are also meeting them where they are, is really, really important.
Yeah, you bring up a great point on a couple of things when we think about the job seeker journey and the job seeker experience. Programmatic advertising. I think last month I was on a panel with Chris Foreman and a few others, was a moderator, and he was sharing a little bit more about programmatic advertising. I think Chris actually conducted a mini study on diversity and inclusion in programmatic advertising and how it helps, right? And how it helps you reach audiences that otherwise you wouldn't be able to reach, right? Because the idea of an open ecosystem versus a closed ecosystem, right? And so programmatic advertising allows you to reach, other talent communities that otherwise you may not reach, that are, affinity groups to different types of marketplaces, different types of job boards, wherever it may be. So I think that was very interesting. Again, we can't do the same thing we've been doing for the last 10 and 15 years and expect different results. We have to do things differently in so many different ways. And you bring up a terrific point, as simple as, from our perspective, 80% of our reach within the Talroo ecosystem is mobile, right? So many people don't have access to a desktop computer. And so, going back to, 5-10 years ago, when it was all about, mobile apply rates, great example of how if you aren't embracing the way to apply in an easy way, using a mobile device, a simple thing as a mobile device, then you're skewing your talent attraction initiatives, right? Because people don't have the luxury or access to a desktop. People are on their mobile device. That's a great simple example of how we have to think differently and we have to ensure that we're communicative and we're reaching all of the audiences and embracing that. So very simple way of how technology and behavior needs to change in order to move that forward. So simple example.
And just something kind of just super simple to add on that, right? Your mobile technology is where we should be going, but you also have nonprofits, community-based organizations, state workforce agencies, vocational rehabilitations who are helping veterans, people of color, people who are, with disabilities get back to work, and they work for the government or they work for a nonprofit. So when you're designing, you should make sure that your tech is still working and still useful and accessible on some older browsers, and definitely always on Explorer, always on Edge, because they won't necessarily have access to the latest and greatest Chrome or Safari or whatever we all use. And when you think design, we're always thinking modernization, but we also have to have versions that are going to work for the people who are helping people get to work.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are some great resources out there that can help you through this journey, help you really understand more about your brand, some terrific agencies that can help you understand that and build really a plan. It really starts with a plan, right? You have to plan, how are you going to prioritize? And you have to take that and you have to internalize that and move forward. So it's probably should we transition to questions from the audience? What do you think, Julie? Good timing for that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, guys. That was fascinating. We have not yet had any questions from our live audience, but there's still time. But while we're waiting for those, and before we introduce the pre-reserved questions, I was struck by a couple of your comments. Thad, you said that we are at a defining moment. No doubt about it. Absolutely true. But we have to, I think, recognize that not everybody's defining moment is the same. And secondly, Julie, you mentioned that technology can serve as a counterbalance to bias. It's not going to eliminate bias, but it can help us deal with the bias that exists. Here's my concern. I think, at least in this community, we're all big believers in technology. We believe in its power and promise, and that's a great thing. But I'm concerned that it might give us a false sense of security. I mean, at the end of the day, the culture of an organization is set from the top. And if the top is biased in subtle ways or even not so subtle ways, no matter what kind of technology you have, that's not going to change the situation. So, what should the HR and talent acquisition community and the technology community be doing collectively to make sure that we aren't just throwing a technology Band-Aid on a much bigger problem in an organization?
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point, and it is a very common reality. We're always looking for kind of the next bright, shiny object that is going to fix our diversity problem. And the truth is no bright, shiny technology, as much as we all love them and we know that they're critical, right? Vendors are critical to getting people to work, is going to beat that culture shift, right? It's garbage in, garbage out. And I think a lot of times, and I'll speak directly to disability, in this case, companies, HR, talent acquisition, D&I were an afterthought, right? Only 4% of the Fortune 1000 include disability in their talent acquisition strategies and their diversity and inclusion strategies. And you're going to get out of a talent pool exactly what you put into it. And so you should be building accessible, inclusive, and measurable strategy that you can report out, report up, and be accountable for. And until we approach diverse hiring as a business strategy that gets the same time and resources that other business strategies get, nothing's going to change. And I absolutely agree that comes from the top. But, where people are unhappy and where they leave is with their managers. And so we have to remember that we can talk all of these nice, pretty things, right, from our C-suite. If that doesn't get pushed down and translated into actionable and accountable performance management or hiring expectations, it's not going to change. And we also need to teach leaders, especially at the front line, how to lead, right? How do people learn? How do you manage people to their greatest ability? And we lose so much talent at that level because the pretty things that they're saying up front aren't getting translated into training and education and development of frontline managers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There are a number of research studies which show that, notwithstanding what I just said about culture being set at the top, that a lot of CEOs, I mean, we still have a ways to go, but a lot of CEOs really do believe in the business case that Thad referred to, that Gartner reported on, that no matter how you feel, and let's hope we all feel the right way, but no matter how you feel, there's a business reason for doing this the right way. But oftentimes that doesn't make it down to the second, third, and fourth levels of management. And as you were saying, Julie, the irony is that companies hire people, but people leave supervisors. That's where the tension exists. And again, we got to be careful that we can put all the right technology there, but if the people using the technology, aren't believers, then we're still going to get negative outputs.
Yeah, and if I could just one other comment on that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Thad. I'll go after
I was just going to, sure, no problem. I was just going to say, Peter, you bring up a great point. I think that when we think about strategy, it's all about strategy, right? And a lot of the technology vendors that are out there today, they're very tactical in what they're looking to solve. And so without that strategy, regardless of how great, certain technology is, it's only solving that tactical piece of one simple component that you're looking to optimize. And so you really need that. You need that plan. You need that blueprint. You need the strategy. That's the key. And I think that, if it gets to a second line manager or a third level manager, and the actual company has said this is a strategy, they're not only they're failing on diversity miserably, but they're failing in every other strategy in the company as well. So I think that all of the managers, all of the CEOs, all the upper level folks have to have that buy-in of a strategy, as you said, and think of it like that. Then the technology will fill in. Once you think about what you're looking, once you think about what you're looking to accomplish, where the pain is, and how you're going to ensure that you're moving this initiative forward, then you can figure out where the technology slots in. Without any of that, the simple way to start is to have a conversation. Have an internal conversation with your team members, and then go from there. We can't just bolt on a technology and think it's gonna solve the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would add just two things. One is you all have the data in your ATSs that you need for the most part, right? Whenever we start working with a company, the very first thing I do is say, give me the data and let me see where your funnel exists now. Where are your self-ID numbers? Let me show you where people are falling out of the funnel now. And before you add new technologies, so that's point is you need to have a baseline of where you are. And that is not an easy job, right? But you've got tons of talent in your communities, in your databases, and that should be setting the baseline for where you go from here. And I think the other really important thing, just kind of while we're talking about inequities, is there is, and rightly so, a big focus on racial inequity right now. And what's important from a D&I perspective is that D&I leaders and talent acquisition leaders do not pit diversity groups against each other, right? Y'all have been working on race and gender for what, 30 years, right? We still aren't there yet, but people with disabilities are Black, they are people of color, they are women, they are veterans, they're LGBTQ. Veterans are all of those things. And so when you are pushing the diversity groups against each other and creating that battle over the pieces of the pie, you're actually exacerbating inequities, right? You're creating challenges for Black people with disabilities to get into work, for veterans who have disabilities to get into work. And we need to be very thoughtful and very attentive to the way that we talk about diversity as a group, and not make it that head-to-head challenge of, well, sorry, I have to focus on this right now. If you're a person with a disability and in a leadership role, you should be supporting your Black ERG, right? How do you get more talent in the door? How do you make opportunities for people of color with disabilities? There shouldn't be that pit anymore. And that has existed for as long as I've been in this business, and is still there today to a lesser extent. I think that's really, really important.
Okay. So we do have some pre-submitted questions. So I'd like to introduce Andrea, coming to us all the way from Dublin. Andrea, welcome to the stage. Please turn on your mic and your camera.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. Hi, Tad. Hi, Julie. So good to see you.
Hello.
Hi. Missing the real face-to-face events for sure. And thank you so much, for giving us an insight into your views and what you see in the market. Coincidentally, just right after this event, I was in a 90-minute ideation session with one of the largest companies in the world around D&I and technology, right? And you nearly expect it from a big company to think about these things and to invest in these things. But I'm interested in learning, what do you see out there? And to some extent, you've answered some of this. Do you think that company leaders, and I'm talking specifically C-suite, see the value, the true value in investing in technology to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion? Very often we hear them, D&I, what do we do for D&I? But what is diversity? What is equity? What is inclusion? And does the CEO, CFO say, yes, I see value in this? Would be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Thad, I've been talking a lot. I'll let you start.
So I think that that's definitely it's a tough question. Absolutely, there is value in this in so many different ways. But like any strategy, I think that, depending on the company, right? Because it's not, I don't think it's a one size fit all. I think that I think that this is the year to make that change. I think that the conversation is happening now, as the conversation should have happened many years ago. But this has been one of those years that has put this on top of everything. I mean, the stats that I shared from Gartner and McKinsey, they aren't new. They've been around, right? So I think that now there's this huge opportunity to really invest in this and invest in technology that can help unearth the possibilities. I think it's about unearthing the possibilities and looking at the technology that can help you unearth the possibilities in that entire funnel. But I'd be remiss to speak to all companies and all CEOs. I can say that our company is fully invested into this, and we're looking for ways to increase that conversation. We're looking for ways that we can be more inclusive in every way. In every way we help, throughout the job seeker journey, throughout internally. But to speak broadly, I certainly hope so. But I definitely think it's about unearthing the possibilities. Technology is about unearthing the possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the iron is as hot as it's ever been, right? I'm probably a little more pessimistic maybe than Thad. I think that there are still a lot of the C-suite that are very interested in investing in marketing and PR activities. And there's nothing wrong with that. You should be building your employer brand in different spaces and in different ways, and your consumer brand. But it should be after you have a story to tell, right? It can't go back to something that is inauthentic. And I do believe that brands who are inauthentic will be held to more account than they have in the past. And I think that the C-suite is recognizing that. But based on the number of, pledges and indexes and other things that I still kind of see all over the diversity space, I want to see hiring. And that's going to have to take that investment in technology. So I know that that's certainly, we're seeing D&I budgets open more than we would have expected, especially during a pandemic. But we have to keep holding them accountable, and we have to keep providing solutions that are going to drive results and outcomes, which means hires. And we're, I think, all well positioned to be able to bring those great candidates to the floor. Now they just have to hire them, right?
And I will.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Thad, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I really do think it starts with trying different things, right? I think that when you think about this, this move that we all have to make, it's very. We tend to, in some cases, it seems to be big and enormous, and then it's hard to get people to really buy into it because it seems huge, right? It seems like a huge initiative. I don't think it has to be a huge initiative. I think it's about results. It's about what are the small things you're doing to get to a broader plan. And I'll give you a great example of something that we did that was unique for us to think about how we could. This was even before, but it's just one strategy, right? From an engineering perspective, previously we weren't as open to looking at boot camps. There are terrific boot camps around the US of people that are learning coding skills. And we said, hey, let's open up recruiting from boot camps. Very diverse background in boot camps for engineers, terrific talent. And we were able to hire some incredible engineers where we changed their life, right? Because they were in a career that they weren't happy in, they weren't rewarded like they should be. And because of that, just by going to that talent pool of going after a few boot camps that were great, we were able to fundamentally change a lot of our engineering projects and be very inclusive in how we're moving that forward. And so it just takes little things. I think if we try to make this, there definitely should be a strategy, but I don't think we should get bogged down that it has to be this huge amount of investment. Should it be long-term? Absolutely. But let's move the ball forward. Let's hit a couple singles. And as we hit a couple singles, let's show improvement to everyone that we're moving it forward. And I think people will feel that sense of accomplishment, that we are committed to this. And I think that's what we have to do as leaders, to really think about things in a different way.
I think you do have to be invested though, right? You can't expect to the diversity community to come to you for free, right? You devalue a group of humans when you say you have to prove to me your worth. You have to prove to me your value. And so I absolutely agree, Thad, that you should be kind of biting the elephant off in pieces. It's not necessarily an all-in strategy all at once, but if the plan is to work off of free resources and have someone be voluntold to build this diversity and to identify tech that might help, you're going to get out of it exactly what you put into it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer. And just one note to your point with boot camps. I was talking to a very interesting company in Europe. I'm based in Europe, and I hear that we're doing more as well. And here in Europe, sometimes we tend to be classist. And they were saying, we are nearly reaching parity in terms of gender in our company. But we might be looking, when we hire, at certain people that come from different, from certain backgrounds. We want to make sure that we check ourselves and our bias. We talk about tech bias and human bias when it comes to something that in Europe is real, classism, right? And they were talking about boot camps and hiring from various different sources. So great point, as you said, there's many places to start with in order to be more inclusive. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next question is from Satish. Satish, if you would please turn on your camera and mic and join us up on stage.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yep. Hi.
Hi,
Nice to meet you.
hi, Julie. Hi, Thad.
Hi there.
Pretty interesting panel there. There's a lot of good data points for me to think about. And I think this is coming from a brown man. Finally, diversity is very important to me. We talk about that all the time with my kids and what we need to do in general for diversity and inclusion. And I think my question would be is, how much do you think employers are hiding behind that tech D&I, and is there a way to validate that data in the results?
It's a great question.
Yep.
Do you want to go first, Thad?
I think you should go first on that one.
Thanks. In short, I think the answer is yes. I think that we have allowed risk mitigation and data management techniques to get so complex and so risk mitigating. I'm not going to have the word that I want to use that's appropriate, but we've allowed fear to take over our talent strategy. And if fear rules our talent strategy, we're not going to get to that change. We're not going to get to that transparency. We're not going to get to that. And I do also think that as talent acquisition leaders, we tend to rely too heavily on our vendors in an unfair way. As I think Thad mentioned before, is it should be a relationship with your vendor. It should be something where you all are constantly refining to get to those goals. And from what I've seen, you know, in the 30-ish companies that we work with, vendors are very willing to continue to partner with companies to move that goalpost. And they're willing to share data, and they want to do data analysis, and they want to get better. But talent acquisition, HR, D&I have to take the time to get in the dirt and really understand what's there. And nothing's going to change as long as we continue to blame our vendors for our failures.
I agree. I agree. I think one of the challenges is that, you know, the devil's in the details in so many ways. And until we actually start examining the details, we won't recognize that the problem exists. We think the problem exists and we know the problem exists, but you know, all the decisions now should all be data driven, and we should be making data driven decisions. And if from a talent acquisition point of view, if we aren't unearthing that and we're just, you know, moving on, that's inefficient and a huge problem, right? We can't until we recognize there's a problem, we can't fix it, right? And we're just talking about it, then that really doesn't do anything. We have to actually dig into it. And I think that that's a great point that Julie brought up, is you have to analyze the data, you have to dig into it, you have to feel empowered to do it though. And I think that's one of the biggest things that, you know, that there's a huge opportunity for talent acquisition leaders, is there needs to be more empowerment. I think too often talent acquisition leaders are looking for permission and not empowered. And I think that we just have to do it sometimes. And I think some of the most successful companies that I've analyzed are focused on empowering talent acquisition versus the permission of talent acquisition. And that is an interesting line in the sand that probably would take entirely another hour to discuss. But thank you for the question.
Thank you both for the great panel. I think there's a lot for me to take away from this panel.
Thank you for the great question.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Julie. Hey, Thad.
Hey there. How are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, as everyone has said, just to reiterate, for your input here. We have time for one follow-up question here. First, before I give it to you, though, I'd like to mention a comment that came in through the chat from Alex Murphy. As many on this conference will know, HR is too often about compliance, and technology tracks compliance and not about driving actual business outcomes, such as a better team because of diverse experiences and points of view. I think that's poignant and worth mentioning. So our final question is, the last session prior to yours was dealing with the challenges of maintaining candidate empathy in the face of automation. How do you create the understanding necessary for true DE&I without human-to-human contact?
Oh, that's the golden question. I'm going to throw this one. Do you get to start this time?
So I've always heard, when you don't know how to answer a question, answer the question you want to answer. So no, I'm just kidding.
That's okay.
You should run for office, Chad.
You know, since it is the golden question, you know, I would say that I go back to the job seeker journey, right? Before an engagement happens, before a conversation happens, whether it's a human or whether it's a bot, there's that a job seeker has learned about you. They have an opinion on, you know, are you a great place to work? Do you have a diverse workplace? You know, are you inclusive? All these things are so important. And so if we assume that, you know, that it's all about that one time that we're engaging with, you know, conversational AI, or we're engaging, we're applying, we're failing miserably. It's an entire journey. It's an entire experience. And if you don't have it right from the beginning, you're going to fail. And I think that would be my big, you know, message is, you know, they've already made the decision if they want to come work for you when they've gone through that process. It's your job to convince them that you're a great place to work. And if you send them an offer, then they'll accept it. You know, I truly believe that the job seeker, with all the different changes happening in the labor market, whether it's this year, 2 or 3 years ago, you know, the job seekers are in the driver's seat in so many different ways, even though we're faced with record, you know, unemployment. I mean, Google reports that job searching on Google is down 20% over last year in this market, right? In this market with record, with such high unemployment. So I think that if you looked at that, go back to the job seeker journey, if you looked at that entire touch point, at the entire experience of the job seeker, that job seeker is engaging with you and saying, I want to come to work for you. It's your job to then convert them into your pipeline. And really, it's the technology that'll lose the battle, because they've already identified, just like branding, right? They've already identified, I want to buy this product. I want to come work for you. Where it gets a little crazy is that your technology could be where they bail, just like customer service, right? I think there was a few years ago, there was a T-Mobile study. I can't remember the specifics a few years ago, but it talked about, the T-Mobile study was when I gave a terrible job application experience, how did my brand suffer? And it was substantial. I mean, it was quantifiable how much, revenue loss occurred because of a terrible apply process. So I would say it's all about the brand. It's about really what's happening before that apply process happens, or that engagement in conversational AI.
So just to follow up on that, so I understand you, Thad, you don't believe that there is a good or a bad or a spectrum to implementation as it relates to automation with an outcome of DE&I?
I wouldn't have the data to answer that. I wouldn't have the data. I do think that, in many cases, depending on what you're using, kind of, garbage in, garbage out, depending on what you're using to essentially theme that, could be a problem. But I think the theory has been that when you engage in conversational AI and when you use a bot, in a lot of cases, there could be less bias in that conversation than a conversation with a human, where there's actually bias in some way in some conversation, if that makes sense. So
sure. But it's clunky though, isn't it, Julie? I mean, these products and services that are meant to automate what Thad just described, have you seen successful implementation of tech products and services that are automating in a beneficial way DE&I?
I mean, I would say it's more from the recruitment marketing side, right? Is how you're communicating back to candidates. It's how you're engaging them. It's how you are dismissing them, right? That's probably the biggest loss of empathy. Is you have to remember that a person has come to your company and they are putting some sort of their future hopes and dreams into your organization, right? And when we discard talent that's not for us right now in such really rude and impolite ways, then we lose them, not just from a brand perspective, but when they grow into that talent that we need. And so I think, that recruitment automation should happen, but it should always have that constant human refinement and segmentation to it. And I think the other thing is, if we just put the keep it simple, stupid rule in place, having a person from an entry level position do a 45-minute assessment is a terrible candidate experience. That's a technology failure in the experience and for your brand. So simplifying endears people to your brand. Simplifying creates a means in which you're demonstrating more empathy for the candidate and for their experience as they decide whether you're right for them or not. And I do agree with that. I don't see the power switch happening back in the way that we're used to. People are comfortable with gig, they're comfortable with side jobs, side hustles, that kind of stuff. And Gen Z and millennials are not going to go work for a company who don't share their values in the ways that Gen X and the others have.
One thought to add to that too is, I think we have to identify something really interesting. Is we never take the human out of human resources.
Yep.
Right. It's that human touch that makes human resources so important to our company. And I think you bring up a great point. I think the best technical implementation is a way we can keep it simple, and we can not take the human out of the equation, but to automate what the recruiter needs to be successful, so that the time that the recruiter is actually connected with a candidate, then the magic happens, right? I think one great example is, one of our partners is Brazen Technologies, and so Brazen, when they started thinking about this idea of conversational AI and how we can connect to candidates, is they said, hey, how can I use a bot to ask some questions, and then if there's a candidate that wants to chat right now to a live human, how can I immediately route them directly to chat right now to a live human, right? That's adding the human back into the process, which is what's so important, but using technology to automate something that should be automated, right? And I think that we have to think about it that way. I think when it comes to this automation should be used when there's something that's very simple that we should spend our time on, because ultimately in human resources, we have to spend our time talking with candidates. That's why we're here, right? Engaging, recruiting, let's go recruiting, right? Let's do what needs to be done. Technology should make that easier so I can spend time doing what I'm supposed to be doing and spend less time on tasks that should be automated. And I think that's where the true innovation and automation happens in our industry. So we can get back to the basics, which is, I want to talk to people. I need to recruit people. I need to move our talent strategies forward. I need to move, our D&I strategies forward. That happens with human to human interaction. Granted, we're not seeing it now because we're all virtual, but it only happens with human to human interaction.
It sounds like if we really pare it down, it's the distinction between automating processes and automating decision-making, which requires human interaction. We're out of time. Thank you both. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a terrific afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.